So I had sent, so I don't want to give too much away, but this thing had to be manufactured somewhere else. So I think the person I bought it from off Etsy was the middleman and then had it shipped from, I am going to spoil it, a different country. And I think whoever generated the FedEx label in that country put the wrong address for you. And it ended up at the haunted mansion from that Amazon.
When you said, I thought that was a joke when you sent me that picture. I was like, I thought that was something you found on Google when you typed in like scariest home entrances or something. And I was like, yeah, that's my place.
And when I got that notification, I was like, I swear that doesn't look like his place. And yeah, so
it had a bat knocker on the
I was just going to say that. Did you see the bat? Literally the haunted mansion.
That's why I was like, it's the haunted mansion. I walked over to that area. I couldn't find the area actually. Cause like, I was like mapping it and it must be like behind someone's building or something.
I think it's a house. I think that's an actual house and that's somebody's gate.
That was not in the front. I mean, I walked like up and down the whole street. It was me at like 9 a.m. in like booty shorts outside. And I was like looking around. I was like, seriously, I was in like my pajama shorts, which are effectively booty shorts. And I'm walking around and I'm just like looking for packages. I couldn't find it. I'm sorry.
Well, it's going to be, I'm on the hunt to find, I literally already have the owner's name of that home. And I'm like, I got to do a background check and get the phone number.
From the picture, I was a little scared as I was walking out there. I was like, I don't know if I want to meet the person who lives at this place if I find it.
I know. The bat knocker. I cannot. But hopefully we can find it.
Why did you send me something? You were so sweet for doing that. You don't have to send me anything.
Because it's a super belated housewarming gift.
Oh my gosh. Oh, they're so sweet. Okay, well, I'm gonna try.
And I think you would just really think it's hilarious and great. So I need we've got to track it down.
I'll find it. I promise. I'm going to go out actually later today and see if maybe they like kicked it out to the curb or something.
I'll say.
Also, wait, what did you want to tell me?
I was to say, all I'll say is when they open it, they're going to be like, what in the world?
You think they would open it?
I don't know. Maybe.
Sometimes if there's mail that comes here for another person, I always put it aside. I always have the tendency, I'm like, I should open it and see like if it's anything important, but I'm like, no, I'll just tuck it away. And they never come to retrieve it.
Well, sometimes
so
people
I just have a pile of someone else's mail.
Yeah. Sometimes people don't even like read the address. They just open it willy-nilly. So
I know my dad's like that.
Yeah.
All the time stuff comes for me and he'll call me and be like, I accidentally opened your mail. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. And it's always nothing. It's always like your car registration is due or something. Like who is just so violently opening up letters left and right that they like don't even bother to read, especially when there are other people who live in the house.
Yeah.
Anywho. Wait, so what did you want to tell me before we jumped on?
Well,
can I know on air?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, it's probably a good thing that we like chatted a little bit before because I was going to come in so hot. I don't know what I cut my foot on, but I sit crisscross sometimes while we record. So I'm getting ready to log on and I look down and my hand feels like wet. And my foot is like covered. My hand is covered in blood. My foot is covered in blood.
No.
And I was like,
just now?
But like right before we got on. And I was like, so my spidey senses are tingling. I'm like I looked down, it was just like blood, like gushing. So I'm ready for whatever you have for me today.
Oh my God. Are you okay? Are you still bleeding?
I'm totally fine. I bandaged it up in 2 seconds. The cut was like so tiny. But when I looked down, I think it was just
sometimes you get those bleeders.
Yeah. So funny.
I wonder where it is. I have this scratch. Can you see that?
I can't.
Baby,
I
can't. Well, it's very tiny and it's very thin, but it's I have this scratch on my arm. I don't know where it came from. I got it in my sleep. I have had, listen, I don't want to like speak this into existence here, but I have had some rough nights, like sleepless nights in this place. And this is an older building that was then like renovated like many times over. Sometimes I just have this feeling that like there's something in here, like
Yeah.
a presence. I don't know. So that's what I'm blaming the scratch on, rather than something sensible like a zipper. But I'm like, I was scratched in my sleep by the
Spirit.
devil himself.
Yeah, that's full spirit.
It's spirit.
Um,
Also, before we jump in, can we have a little tiny chat? Humor us, everybody, for a second on Kyle and Mauricio. R.I.P.
you can't let me go there because I won't stop.
I'll rein us back in if we go too far, but first of all, can we just say Allison was right all along? He will never emotionally fulfill you. Know that.
I was just gonna say, know that. I mean, where were you when the news broke?
You were the first one who broke it to me because you sent me, I think you literally sent me the quote. I was in bed and you were like, please tell me you've heard. Please tell me you've heard the news. The queen is dead. The queen is dead.
That's how I felt. I can't take another Bravo scandal. Like the Vanderpump Rules one almost drained
Took
me of every brain cell I had left. Like I can't.
Well,
okay,
I'm still a little bit murky. Tell me if you know more about this than I do, because I'm kind of murky on like who's actually breaking off what. Because everybody who I know in my like Bravo circle was saying Kyle is the one who's initiating the divorce because Kyle was the one who cheated.
So there's always been these rumors, I guess, that Mauricio was maybe fooling around, but it never got confirmed. Like they always kind of shut it down and diverted the storyline elsewhere. Like I think she's always been really good about that. Because I guess in the last, honestly, there's definitely one earlier season where it was like a big thing. And then a recent season where it kind of came back up, but they shut it down. And then with this, I mean, you know, all the conspiracy theorists believe that she's in a relationship with a woman.
Her with Morgan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, this could be Kyle's revenge move. If any of the conspiracies around Mauricio cheating were true, this is Kyle's, like, I don't know, retribution for whatever he allegedly did to her. I remember all of those conspiracies because it was Mauricio and Dorit had a thing, which I was fully willing to perpetuate because that's so hot.
Wait, where was I? Living under a rock?
You don't know about that? Are you for real?
No, I have no idea what that is.
No, that is the rumor, is that whoever the other woman that Mauricio cheated on Kyle with was Dorit. And that's where all of the internal animosity came from. Obviously, it was never confirmed, but really think about, listen, Dorit is looking for an out. She's trying to jump ship from PK and has been since day one because Dorit is so hot and PK is a soft shell crab and Mauricio is just there. Mauricio is just there.
PK.
PK. No, I love saying how she says Jag. Oh, Jaggy.
How are you so
Kyle.
good at that? Kyle. It's
Kyle, honey, you can't do that.
That is so good. Last thing I'll say.
I love the idea. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were about to rein us in, and I
off.
was just saying, last thing I will say is, and creepers, if you watch Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, I encourage you to go on YouTube and find a video of Dorit speaking at her fashion show 10 years ago, and she had a totally American accent.
I appreciate the camp of the British accent.
I do too. Yeah.
I don't they say that like it takes roughly 10 years of being around somebody who has the accent or living in another place before you like develop the accent yourself. So I can understand if like she's been around PK for like 10 plus years and she's like, oh my God. It's just a little ridiculous.
It's a little Madonna. It's a little Madonna. But
very insulated. Yeah.
Listen, if it works for Dorit, it works for Dorit.
Something's working for Dorit, and I think it's Mo. I think it's Mauricio.
Oh.
Kyle, I'm sorry. Creepers, I'm real sorry. If you're not a Housewives fan, I know this was probably insufferable, but if you are a Housewives fan, this was for you.
We're so sorry. We haven't talked about Bravo in a hot minute. So that'll be Creepers. That'll be the last of it for another 20 episodes or whatever.
I can't hold us to those kind of restrictions, but we'll see. Because more of this could unfold. Imagine if more comes out. If the scandal actually does break, it was Mauricio and Dorit. Anyway, so I am going to pivot us into our actual case. I'm sure I'll put a timestamp somewhere to say like X amount of minutes in is when we actually start the podcast. If you're listening, check the description. It should be there somewhere. Welcome back, I should say, to everybody to CreepTime, the podcast with Celestine and Stu. Miss Stu, I have a... Do you even know what we're doing? Did I tell you? Oh, wait, I sent you like a list, didn't I? But maybe you forgot.
And I thought to myself, wait, go back and check the list before you start today. And then I was like, no, I'm just going to like guess from memory what it was when you sent it to me over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Malaysia flight?
Oh, yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is. I chose this. So inadvertently, this was a suggestion from you because you're not technically blind reacting to this one because you know this case, but I know this is a very freaky story for you. So I was like, I need to scour the internet for every scrap of research. I have so much research. I'm actually nervous to get into all of this because it's a lot. But we are covering the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 that vanished. Are you already feeling spooked?
I'm not breathing.
Well, what do you know about it from the jump? I mean, when did you first hear about it? What is your memory of like when it hit the news? Because we were both, I mean, it was 2014, so we were alert. I
mean, I remember we were in college. I'm trying to think of where I kind of was when the news about it came out. But I remember being so freaked by it. I just like didn't understand how that could happen. And I remember like didn't they find like the black box and they found like maybe some shrapnel or they found nothing? I can't remember.
No, they found, okay, so, oh God, I cannot wait to get into like the meat of this because, well, there is some like real, to answer your question, they did find pieces of things, but there is some very, very legit conspiracy around that, which is like almost etching itself out of conspiracy territory. And it's like, oh no, that was like very obvious cover-up kind of stuff. A lot of pressure on the government to get this solved, to give answers here.
Yeah. Oh man. And I just remember I think if I'm remembering correctly, like some images of the families that maybe gathered.
Yeah, those I remember.
Yeah.
Protested, actually, yeah. I mean, against the Malaysian government. There was a lot of like, here, maybe I should give a quick top line just for anybody who's not familiar with the story. For those who don't know it too well, the quick snapshot of the story is that back in 2014, a commercial aircraft of Malaysian Airlines carrying 239 people on board, including 12 of the crew members, vanished from air traffic control's radar while flying over the South China Sea. So what we know is that the plane, although somehow, it disappeared from the radar, it flew for several hours, actually many hours without detection, which led some people to believe that this wasn't quite a malfunction or like internal disaster of the aircraft, but something very sinister happened here. That's kind of loosely what you remember too.
Yeah.
I can already tell the wave of seriousness is washing over you.
Where you're like straight up. I don't know what it is about this sort of same kind of feeling with Bermuda Triangle, but this kind of like a something takes over and it's just totally out of your control sort of situation, and then to not have closure.
Yeah, it's the open-ended story was what really freaks me out. I also, so it kind of sounds like you think it might have been like unexplained disaster, or do you think that maybe the pilot could have had something to do with like the disappearance? I
mean, I definitely think that a lot of people lean towards the pilot potentially having some issues. But I don't know. I mean, I think for a long time we didn't quite know much about him, or we didn't know. At least
it was ambiguous, and
at the beginning,
the media was
I remember
like kind of running rampant.
Yeah, I remember at the beginning everybody kind of being like, "What the hell could have happened?" So in my mind,
because you don't want to assume that a pilot did anything
right
nefarious to an entire cabin of people, but that's also really scary to me. The idea that like the person in charge, you're like, I don't know, safekeeper, could have a screw loose could go crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially on such a big plane.
Huge. Oh my, I'm surprised you know about that. Yeah, it's a massive plane. It's the second largest commercial aircraft.
Yeah, I do remember that too. Not that it was the second largest commercial aircraft, but I remember it being a very large
damn,
plane.
I was like, you want to run this episode?
Hey, I'm DB Cooper, remember?
Do you think people are going to like get upset with us because we're like on an airplane theme now because we've just done DB Cooper and now we're doing the Malaysian Airlines flight?
Listen, maybe we're looking to go on a vacation soon, and we're just that's what's going on here. I would like to.
Yeah,
I would
we're
like
like slowly
to fly
dropping hints
somewhere.
Well, maybe I should get into the rest of this top line here so I can give you some extra details that I think when I really get into the thick of this, I cannot wait to hear what you're going to say. So let's see. We know that the plane went down. It was off radars, but we know that it was flying for hours after it disappeared. To this day, there have been these extensive search efforts to look for remains and passengers and any debris from the missing plane, but nothing has ever fully been found. And there are lots of theories that spell out that something very insidious could have happened on this flight. We just don't really know which direction that could have gone in. But before we jump into it, I just will say welcome back, everybody. Just to give a second intro, thank you for stopping by for a Friday episode to CreepTime. I'm Silas. Stu is here.
Woohoo.
We are so grateful that you guys stuck around so you could listen to an episode with us. We have new episodes every single week, so thank you for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening. Quick order of business to help us grow just a bit quicker. We always like to ask, if you have not, please pause this podcast right now just to make sure that you are subscribed or following the podcast wherever you listen. Could be Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or YouTube. And if you could leave us a review, we appreciate those too, because I don't know how often you read them, but I'm in there every single day because I appreciate the hot takes on the podcast, whether they're good or bad. So if you feel so inclined to leave us a review, we really appreciate the positivity there. And if you want CreepTime to grow even bigger, I think I've said in the past, you can always share it with a friend, family member, or coworker, anybody that you absolutely want to scare the shit out of. But you could also just post it to strangers on Reddit.
You better mark
That's
that
a
down.
Great avenue as well.
That was 1732.
Thank God. What would I do without you? 1732, the year I was born. All right. Now, shall we jump in?
Let's
Feeling
do
ready?
it.
All right. You can feel like how belabored my breath is because I know how much research I'm about to get into. So let's just talk a little bit about the flight itself, a few key details here, just so we know what we're getting into. So I want to talk about our captains first. So we have Zahari Ahmad Shah. He is our lead captain of the flight. And there is the co-pilot, who is Farik Abdul Hamid. And they are flying Flight 370 of Malaysia Airlines. It is a Boeing 777, which, like we said, it's a commercial aircraft that is one of the largest, in fact, the second largest that was available at the time, with 239 people on board. This includes passengers and crew. So here's what we know. We got the flight departing on the evening of March 8th, 2014. It is a red-eye flight, so it's going to be flying pretty late into the night, which I did not know, and adds a completely new layer of freaky to this, to think that all of this went down in the dead of night in a black sky over the ocean.
Oh.
That's terrifying. I almost swore again, but I was like, that's messed up.
I don't think I knew that.
Oh, this is some insidious stuff that goes down on this. It's worst nightmare kind of stuff. It was let's see, it was supposed to depart from Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia. It was going to be headed towards Beijing Capital International Airport located in China. So from everything that was teed up from air traffic control, the flight was going to be relatively easy, which is also strange here. Like, they had a clear night, very clear skies, low winds, turbulence was expected to be low to absolutely nothing. Like, nothing to indicate that rough weather or anything could have spelled disaster for this flight. So how do we actually explain what happened here? So we have this flight. It is direct. It's going to be roughly 5 hours and 45 minutes that they are going to be traveling from airport to airport. And something I didn't know, and you can tell me if you knew this, I had never really thought about how air traffic control works for international flights. So what happens is air traffic control shifts from country to country and sometimes like airport to country. So typically, like it would go from like there's air traffic control at the airport to get you off the runway, and then it transfers to like Malaysia National Air Traffic Control. And then once you cross the border of like the air zone into like a different country, Vietnam was going to pick up the next air traffic control. It would never happen. So roughly an hour into that flight, when they were supposed to switch off from Malaysia to Vietnam, they switched off from Malaysia. They never switched on to Vietnam. That is the eerie part of the story because so much of it feels deliberate, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the time people believed, or maybe some people still believe, like you go over the ocean maybe and something went wrong and it didn't pick up. But that is, I don't think I knew that part. I didn't remember that part.
You, like I said, you want to believe that, you know, it could have been accidental. But when we get into how many different methods this plane, specifically this aircraft, had as far as like tracking capabilities and tracing, so much goes wrong and goes dark that it's very, very hard to believe that there wasn't interference, you know? So let's go back and actually piece together minute by minute what happens in the cabin of this plane in the very first hour before they vanish. So the Boeing 777, I should mention, like I said, it's not your average plane. This is one of the largest planes available. And it was not new for Boeing. This had actually been the 400th production model of this plane that they had made. And this particular aircraft had made 7,000 successful trips prior to this incident. So that also kind of edges things out of the idea of mechanical failure, or you know what I mean? Because it's not a new plane, right?
Yeah. And I feel like if that's a plane that's been manufactured for a long time, they kind of know the drill. And it seems like it was.
Absolutely. And because of its size, too, it had a lot of extensive safety features inside, like very sophisticated equipment to ensure not only safety, but traceability from control centers on land. And in fact, I was reading some of the stats around this, like with this particular incident in aircraft, you would have been more likely to be individually struck by lightning than you would be to have experienced a malfunction in this particular plane. That is how safe it is, which only makes all of this even more strange and deliberate. But I want to talk about the captain and the co-pilot first, just to give you some backstory on who they are, because I only really touched on their names. Did you know anything about them, or just like what you've picked up from the news over the years?
I didn't. I remembered it was a male pilot, but I know nothing.
Yes. Let's see. So we have our captain. He's the head pilot, Zahari Ahmad Shah. He's 56 at the time and was extremely experienced. He had been promoted to captain in the early 90s, and he had extensive experience with flying this aircraft, as well as this particular flight pattern to China. So it's not his first time around the block. He was well versed in how this was going to go. He was known to absolutely love his work. He was liked by all of his co-pilots and the flight crews and just seemed to be like a very stand-up guy. And there were reports I found just about his home life that, you know, he was very communal, very involved in his local community and neighborhood. He would often cook food for communal events. He donated a lot of food to like homeless shelters nearby. Like he's a very normal and good person from everything I could piece together. But before I jump into the co-pilot, I just want to touch on one detail here that does spell something strange. So the captain, although he has like a glowing report of his person from everybody who knew him, his family said that something was off with him in the months leading up to this disappearance. He had become much colder around them and kind of seemed very withdrawn, like something had really changed in him, and he wasn't really spending a lot of time with the family. He was actually spending most of his time in his basement where he had the homemade flight simulator, which actually was designed to mimic the exact cockpit of a Boeing 777. He would spend hours down there just like simulating flights and like playing around in that. And to quote his own daughter, which she said after the disappearance, she was talking about the time like leading up to it, it was like he was a different person. We don't know a ton of details about what could have caused this shift in him or how serious this was for him and what was going on inside his head, but it definitely spelled trouble for the marriage because just a day prior to the takeoff of Flight 370, his wife and kids actually separated and moved out of the house, which I know that sounds shocking right out the gate, where you're like, that spells a very dark story. Like that's probably somebody who was already on a decline and then hit a low, and then were in charge of flying a commercial aircraft.
Yeah.
To make it even stranger, actually, and this is unconfirmed as to whether or not it's related to the case and what went down on that flight, the flight simulator that he had at his home, once it was found and inspected, they looked at the logs, and it was found that just hours before he went to the airport to fly MH370, he had deleted some of the data from the simulator at home. And it's not clear why he did that. They don't believe that it had anything to do with the disappearance or his doing. It's just a strange detail that he chose to delete data just before a fatal flight. It's unnerving. I mean,
Yeah.
it's difficult to like ignore and not concede to the feeling like he might have had a bigger hand in some of this.
Sure.
I don't know. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'm trying not to immediately kind of say, okay, that checks out for me, because I know there's so much more that you're going to uncover. But what struck me is that a major life event like a separation, I mean, I know that pilots have they have to adhere to their schedule, like it's a strict thing, but I think that he chose to show up to work the next day is telling. You know, a lot of people, like a divorce or something like that, or your kids leaving, could be a day where you're like, I cannot go out. But maybe for some people, it's also immerse yourself in your work, and like that's how you get through stuff.
I agree with you. I mean, I guess I hadn't really thought about that, but that's kind of true. I mean, think about that in terms of a surgeon too. Like, you have to perform life-saving surgery sometimes when you've just had the worst day of your life.
Yeah.
You could be going through a divorce. Like, obviously, I'm sure there are precautions where like you can call out of a surgery and like it would have to be rescheduled, or another doctor would have to pick it up if like something serious was going on. But I guess people like that have days like that all the time that we don't even know about.
Yeah. And just from what it sounds like he was kind of going through, he's probably a very like intense person. Like he's, you know, doing his work at home, like practicing after all these years of doing it like so many times.
I was trying to like understand that too. Why I mean, unless he truly just loves flying and it's just enjoyable for him.
Which could be, but also like if he's not spending time with his family or whatever, and like that's his safe space to, you know, wake up one day and know that you've somehow let your family down, and then you're separating, and that's already happening. If you've got to go to work the next day and fly, you know, however many hundreds of people, if you're already in a headspace of being like, oh, like I've let down my family, you're probably like, I don't want to go like let down these other people that I've committed to, you know, flying. I know that's probably a little like of a deep cut. Like I'm really just trying to like imagine how he could have been if he's a little unstable at this point, like what the mode was there.
Yeah. I mean, this also isn't the first time that we've seen a pilot or a captain of a plane like have a moment, or they, you know, shift into a point where they're unstable. But that's the whole reason for the co-pilot. You know, it's the reason that you have a co-captain. I've actually seen videos. I don't know if you've seen this story a while ago of, I think he was a pilot who was flying a plane, but his co-pilot realized that he had been drinking. So he there are like certain strategies and like protocols you can do to kind of get somebody out of the cockpit and like so he locked the captain out of the cockpit and radioed into air traffic control. And he was like, we have an emergent situation. The captain is inebriated. I'm taking over the flight. We're planning to land at the nearest, you know, runway strip. Can you help us navigate? So there are like provisions. It's just shocking to think that all of this went down, even if we're assuming like the pilot was having his breakdown. The co-pilot was there, unless the co-pilot, something happened to him. That's the other conspiracy around this, that he was maybe knocked out or subdued somehow. I should probably get into his backstory too, actually. Hold on.
Sure.
Now we've got co-pilot Farik. He had a pretty detailed backstory as well. He is much younger than the captain. He's actually just 27, but he's very well accomplished in this field, and he had a passion for flying. And just 2 years prior to this, he was actually promoted to first officer, which was a sizable promotion given his age. And I think it's really a testament to his work ethic within Malaysian Airlines. This flight, this particular flight, and this is kind of devastating when you hear it, in tandem with the story. This was set to be his final training session before he was going to be promoted to captain at 27.
Wow.
He was ambitious. He was smart. He had great prospects on the horizon. And he was actually set to marry another employee of Malaysian Airlines, his fiance, who was also a pilot. Her name was Nadira Ramli, and she was a captain already at just 26.
Wow.
So impressive.
Let me tell you, flying is so. I have, just to give us a little bit of levity, I have flown a plane very, very briefly one time, like a little Cessna or Cessna. I forget what they're called. That is hard. That is so hard. Like, I did it for 2 seconds and I pressed a couple buttons, and that's amazing to be like that accomplished of a captain at 26. Like, wow.
I was just going to say, I was like, are you allowed to say that? Because is that against could somebody have their pilot's license be taken from them if they give somebody a joyride?
So that was alleged.
The look on your face. That was
alleged.
Just a lie.
That was actually a friend of mine. That was a friend of mine.
I'm just. I was like, shoot. Do I have to cut out?
Well, I can always ask.
Anyway,
I can ask the person. Anyways,
it's okay. You didn't name anybody. Let's see. But I mean, that's kind of tragic. Just to talk about the co-pilot as well. Like, he just had so much that was ahead of him. Like, this was about to be his promotional flight, and he was going to get married. So to think that, he was lost to this tragedy, everyone who was lost to this tragedy, just kind of hit me hard as I was going through the research. But that's kind of the backstory on those two pilots. Any thoughts about that just before I shift into what's actually going on the flight in the first hour?
I don't have any additional thoughts, but I'm so glad you kind of gave the backstory, because that was going to be my first thing. Like, I want to know how these two pilots were doing right before they flew the plane, and kind of who they are. So
I think they were both, it's funny actually, and I'll get into this a little bit later because it's detailed in the first hour of the flight, because like I said, air traffic control has to transfer from Malaysia National to Vietnam. So the way that I think it's called a handshake is the appropriate flight term for that. But you have to basically say goodbye and good night to your current air traffic control, and then you say good morning to the next air traffic control. Mm. So the lead pilot and I think the co-pilot were both heard on radio just before that transition took place, and both sounded fine.
Wow.
Both sounded coherent, both sounded level-headed, relaxed. Everything felt normal. It just never happened. They never made the transition. So something bizarre went down. So let's actually get back into what we know about the flight itself. Now, the flight was set to depart after 11 p.m. It's a red eye, like I said. Time of departure status, the skies were cleared, as were the pre-checks of the aircraft. Nothing was ever flagged in the plane because they do a check before it's going to fly, obviously. Nothing was flagged as abnormal during the checks, and the flight had adequate fuel to make the trip and was expected to touch down in China after 6 a.m. So passengers, once it was cleared after the checks at 11, started to board at 11:40 p.m. And this was the last time anyone would ever see these people. So the flight hit the runway and was cleared for departure just after 12:40. So it took a full hour basically to get everybody on board and get everybody situated for the flight to take off. Takes off at 12:40 into the night sky. And this is the last moment anyone's ever going to see that plane. Now, once it's in the sky, it's critical that we stress just how normal everything was with this flight. Nothing was flagged. Everything was going fine. Within the first 10 minutes of the flight, they are instructed to make the first handoff. Okay, that's what it's called, a handoff. So this is when the airport control hands off the air traffic control to the national control radio, which can manage the flight in the air as it's climbing up to 35,000 feet until it's eventually going to be handed off to the next country. Very normal. So this took place at exactly 12:50 a.m. The control center said hello to the crew, including Captain Shaw, who, like I said, sounded perfectly fine. And they're instructed, okay, you're cleared to go up to 35,000 feet, which they did. And Shaw, our captain, leveled out the plane, and it was stable at this height. ready to be set in autopilot. At no point during the first 30 minutes was there any interruption with their communication. They were in constant contact with control, and everything was settling in to be an easy and run-of-the-mill trip. Now, within that first hour, they had to make the other handoff, and this was going to go, once they crossed the border of airspace and they were going from Malaysia to Vietnam, they cross over to the Vietnam control, like I said, and they're supposed to wish them good morning. It's a very seamless thing. There's nothing really wrong here. At 1:19 a.m., this was when the captain got his instructions. Okay, you're good to switch over to Vietnam control. He sounded normal, and he agreed to do so. So they switched off from Malaysia and never switched over to Vietnam control. This is a process that, in theory, is supposed to take seconds. But then 1 minute goes by, and then 2, and then the control center becomes concerned. Because Vietnam Air Traffic Control was expecting them, and they attempted to make contact several times, but they realized that the aircraft wasn't even turned on to their frequency at the control center. They're on this is what's called a black spot, basically. It's a gap in time where no one can find them on radar. So this was concerning, but it's not emergent just yet. There are certain periods in flights where communication has a lag and there could be a black spot. But again, everything seemed really prompt thus far, so nothing could lead anyone to believe like, oh, they're probably just experiencing a temporary communication delay or something. But I just want to talk about how rare a circumstance like this could be. Now, this has to do with the transponder, and I'm going to get into some like airplane lingo and knowledge here, which was definitely a stretch for mama, but I'll do my best. So to spell out what a transponder is, it's a small black box within the plane to relay information about location, speed, etc. Right? Cars have this too. Obviously, a plane black box is much more sophisticated. But it can be used to transfer that information to any station or air traffic control that needs it to ensure that you will not be lost. Wherever you're headed, they are going to find you and be ready for you. So if for whatever reason they lost contact with the transponder, that was critical. So here's where things get strange and how the control centers knew something was wrong. When the pilot was to transfer from Malaysia control over to Vietnam control, Malaysia control said goodnight and closed the communication and watched the plane on the radar for several minutes, but noticed that was the second that it went off course. It veered 30 degrees to the right away from Malaysia, Vietnam, and China and towards an open territory of the ocean. There was no explanation as to why the pilot was suddenly going off the route as soon as it lost communication or closed out communication with Malaysia. And then just 2 minutes into the detour, the transponder was manually turned off by someone in the cockpit. I just gave myself chills. Jesus. Let me just talk about that real quick because this is unheard of. Transponders do not get turned off unless there is an emergency that requires that. And even so, the protocol is that you must communicate this to the control center prior to doing so. There were no circumstances where the pilot can just do that. And the second that that transponder got turned off, as does air traffic control system in the cockpit, the plane is officially missing. It is no longer on any radar and panic ensues. Thoughts on that thus far?
Oh my gosh. It just sits so heavy for me. And I know why, but I think the idea that what I really do need to look up what it is, like fear of like open, maybe not open water, but like open spaces.
Is it like being lost in like a vast space?
Yeah, like something like that really freaks me out. And I think we've kind of ruled out that there's really no instance where somebody would go off course entirely and not be able to like get themselves back on or like have noticed it if it was unintentional, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think people thought they didn't want to believe that it was intentional. They were like, well, if he's going off course, there has to be like a mechanical failure, or maybe he's trying to like do a 180 to like get back to the airport if he's close enough to Malaysia. But again, like in that initial look at the radar, it was like 2 minutes where they were like, why is he going 30 degrees to the right? Why is he going off the course that we set for him? And then the little blip just goes away, just disappears. But that was not the end of the story, because we're able to trace back. Once I get into like how they were able to track down what the hell happened on this flight, it spells a story. There is a story here. Something went down on that plane, and I can't even imagine what was going on in the cabin and the cockpit. But it's freaky. I mean, to think that somebody manually turned off a transponder, and that's something that's only available to do so if you're in the cockpit, if you're a pilot, we're assuming. That's dark. Like, something was going on there, and it felt deliberate.
Yeah, because I think also the other thing is it's not like a typical, if it was going to be like a heist or a hijacker or something, normally there's a gain to, even if it's going to be, something like a suicide mission, you want it to be for something, some end result, like someone would notice. And yeah, so
I don't mean to be smiling through like you saying suicide mission,
no.
But it's only because I have theories like you're like, if it would be for a suicide mission, and I'm over here grinning like an
yeah.
What time is it?
4110. No, yeah.
Thank you.
Creepers. That's for the censor button if that didn't make sense at the beginning.
Yeah, sorry. Hopefully that's been communicated. Anytime we swear, we have to call it the time so it's easier for editing. Yeah, it's a freaky setup for sure. And when we talk about motive and you're talking about like, well, if it was hijacked, like why would anybody hijack it? There's quite a few points of contention here. One specifically that has to do with the cargo that was on this plane. And two, it has to do with some of the people, the high profile people that were on the plane. There's a lot of conspiracy around it.
Okay.
Which I'm going to get into, I promise. But I do want to keep going with this story because that is not the end of our knowledge of where the plane was headed. But I just want to say right off the bat, just speaking about the likelihood of this. So what we have so far is that the transponder has been manually turned off, as well as the air traffic control system in the cockpit. So the likelihood, and it's not to say, it could have been that both malfunctioned, but the likelihood of losing both systems at the same time due to a malfunction is nearly impossible. There is virtually no way that this couldn't have been deliberate, any which way you slice it. It's just a question of who was really behind it and why. But even in the event, let's say that these two systems are off in the plane and they're like, we can't trace this thing, there is another way to track a plane which they utilize. I have to say, doing this research made me feel very comfortable. Like, if a plane ever had a malfunction where it got lost, I'm like, oh, they could definitely trace me, because there's a million things they can do to trace a plane. It's crazy.
It is pretty amazing. I'll also say, and then I'll let you continue, but I think it's pretty incredible when you think about airlines and like why so much stuff goes wrong. Like when you're at the airport and your bags are missing and your whatever's are, it's because they have to dedicate so much of their resources and time to making sure you get from point A to point B safely. And they're going to put way more focus on that than they are with your carry-ons and the flights arriving on time. It's always baffling to me that like sometimes it's hard to remember that, like when you're getting frustrated at the airport, that's why that happens, is because they have to make sure it's safe before any of the other stuff can follow after.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've never understood the idea when people are like pissed when their flight gets canceled for weather. I'm like, do you want to be up in the air in that? I'm sorry.
That's like Final Destination.
Do you want to be flying
vibes.
through a hurricane?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, listen, if my flight gets canceled, it's going to be me in that airport bar for the next 4 hours. And then I'll probably go someplace. I'll go to a casino nearby or something.
It's going to be me with the hotel voucher and room service. Okay.
I understand. I empathize. It's frustrating for sure. But baby, you don't want to be up in that sky. That's bad. That is some, oh God, what was not cockamamie. I said a Nancy word before I got on. That was, it was like tomfoolery.
You said
God,
kin.
it's on the tip of my tongue. No. I said kin, but it was before I even got on with you. I was talking to myself. I was like, oh God, what was it? Cattywampus, something like that. It was like tomfoolery, shenanigans, something. Anywho, so where we're at is that we've got those two systems that are off on this plane. But like I said, there is another way that a plane can be tracked. So they decide to utilize this other method. This is known as the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System. This is a system which reports real-time information to the manufacturing company in this case. So it would be Boeing. Now, this is like a live system, and basically it's more about communicating like real-time data on like engine performance to ensure that the aircraft is flying perfectly, so that if there is a discrepancy, the manufacturing company and their live support can basically contact air traffic control and be like, we're flagging a malfunction. But it can communicate other things like outside of how the engine is running. It's like, are there any issues like inside the cockpit or the cabin? What are the fuel levels? It's really helpful. And honestly, again, it makes me feel so safe.
Mm-hmm.
But this system, there's actually two of them. There's one that's located in the cockpit, and there is one that is located in the actual cabin with the passengers in the middle of the plane. Now, the cockpit system reports things like speed and control functionality, while the cabin system reports functionality of the body of the plane, like pressure levels. Now, these systems were observed as an emergency resort for any information as they'd lost complete contact with the plane. At 1:21 a.m., the data coming in from both of these systems reported that although off course, the plane was flying at a normal speed, had normal fuel consumption, and the pressure levels in the cabin were normal. Sorry, gotta clear my throat. And then, pause.
I was going to say, baby, I see tears. I see tears in your eyes. Take your time.
Not take your time. Babe, take your time, honey.
Take your time, honey.
Well, then we've got, let's see. And then at 1:22 a.m., both systems completely dark. Nefarious. In the cockpit and the cabin, both systems go dark at the same time. So what that tells me is that if this was a hijacking either from a terrorist on board or it was the doing of one of the pilots, it tells me that this did not sit only within the cockpit. This extended to someone going out to the cabin and manually shutting something off.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Well, that was going to be my question, is if those automatically would go off because something else gets turned off, or is that something that you'd have to switch off yourself?
The only other explanation outside of manually disrupting, destroying, or turning off the system is another widespread malfunction.
Okay.
But again, the likelihood of those two systems, because they're separate of each other, but relaying information to the same place, the likelihood of them both going out after the other two safeguard systems also went out
at the same time,
nearly impossible.
Yeah.
Same time, 1:22 a.m. But at this point, the flight is now completely lost and is flying blind into the night sky over the ocean. If this was a mechanical failure, how terrifying for a pilot. How absolutely horrifying that must have been.
That's exactly, this is the crux of why this case is so intense for me, is because
Mm-hmm.
it is so terrifying to think that like that was the last, however long they were, if it was a panic situation like that,
Mm-hmm.
that everybody on board at some point or another, domino effect, started to have to go through that terror. And it's just
realize something was wrong.
Yes, and that's just such an awful way to die. It's just horrific. It's awful.
Well, they didn't die just then, is the thing. There's more data that we're able to get. Believe it or not, there is another method. So this is crazy. So it wasn't reported immediately when the flight first went missing, but although all three systems lost contact with the flight, with the flight at 1:22 a.m., there was one radar that maintained tracking this flight after that time. It was the Malaysian military radar, which had eyes on the flight and watched its behavior. So what they saw happening after 1:22 a.m. is actually even more chilling. They saw... Oh my God, I'm going to choke on this podcast.
And as you're choking, there's a huge siren going by. It always happens at the same time.
I'm timing it perfectly.
Yeah.
I'm trying my best. But what they saw, this is really freaky, what the military radar saw. And they didn't initially release this, and I'll talk about why they didn't. You'll probably agree with why they didn't, even though it was harmful. The control center was watching this plane, and after it went off course by the 30 degrees, like I said, to the right towards the South China Sea, It then unexpectedly made a sharp, sharp turn left. And when we're talking about a left, like this was a full 180 degrees left. And it actually was heading back towards Malaysia. So this completely pivots the story because this would have been something, one, the flight crew and the passengers absolutely would have felt. And they would have been like, something's wrong. This is not normal. Because that's not an autopilot thing. Like to actually manually turn a plane 180 degrees, that's a lot. But it was almost like they looked like they were aware that they were trying to fake a right. And then once they knew that they pulled out the system for the last system or radar could track them, they didn't account for the military system, they turned back left. So they were trying to intentionally misguide whoever was watching them into thinking they were headed towards the China Sea. They were on their way back to Malaysia in that direction. Eerily, though, even the military radar lost contact in tracking this plane after an 8-minute period. So at exactly 1:30 a.m., the flight had gone dark from all radars, and we don't know what exactly happened after this at this point. Now, believe it or not, Miss Stu, there is a fourth way that you can track a plane even when all of these systems go out. Space satellites can connect to a plane because a plane has satellites on it and it can ping, but the information that's collected is very minimal. It's basically like, it's called like a check ping. I think they nickname it like hey, like when it goes back and forth, because it's just to say like, oh, object X is at object A location at this time. Right? So they're able to find the plane this way first. And with some quick math, they can actually determine, they're like, okay, what's the speed looking like? How fast is it going? Which is really helpful in this case, because they're like, if that plane is like losing speed or gaining speed and it's like soaring, we could maybe assume maybe there's a mechanical issue going on. So that's what they initially expected. They're like, this is probably some sort of a mass system failure. The plane is going down. It's not what they find. Within a few seconds of looking through the satellite data, the plane remained in the air at a steady speed for 7 hours total before it went completely dark on all transmissions. Finally, 7 hours in the air this plane went. How do you feel about that?
I mean, it's torturous. If you know, if it was something for either for him, if it was a non-nefarious thing and he was trying to figure out what the heck was going on with the plane and how to get these people back somewhere, terrifying.
7 hours.
First of all, keeping people calm for 7 minutes on a plane would be a feat. It would be a miracle, but I cannot imagine 7 hours up in the air and it not. I don't even want to say what I'm thinking because it's so dark, but like, I just don't see how a plane of 239 or 79, 39 people
239, yeah,
could be cool, calm, and collected for 7 hours. I think that stuff went down on that plane that was probably just so dark.
You know what's crazy too is that one of the eeriest pieces of evidence in this is that at no point was there ever any cell data that connected at all from any passenger of trying to make a phone call or trying to send out a text. I'm not entirely clear on like the mechanical logistics of that. If like all of the communication systems going out from the plane also meant that phones weren't going to be able to connect to anything, but it flew for like quite a bit, you know, and at different points was close enough to certain cell towers that somebody may have had like a pending text that might have gone out that may have been like partially received. Of all 239, there was never a single communication that went out that was exclaiming they were in distress or exclaiming that they needed help or a goodbye message. Just really, really freaky to me. And although this system, the satellite system, which was able to eventually determine that they were 7 hours up in the air, it couldn't give a precise location. It told a story that the plane was not online, but of course was traveling for upwards of 7, close to 8 hours. And this was over the course of 8 pings that were received total by the satellite, which, like I said, was suggesting it was maintaining a normal speed and it was very consistent in the air. And then at exactly 9:15 a.m., this is the official timestamp when the plane officially goes dark and the connection to the satellite was broken, and the assumption is that the plane went down into the ocean. Now, what's so devastating about this is that it's really unfolding in the middle of the night. So this was like I said, it was a red eye. So nobody really got news of this. Families and loved ones actually arrived early at the airport, getting close to 6, because they were expecting that the plane was going to land. They were going to pick up their people. So what they were told, because the airport also didn't know anything, and they were also confused because it's very, very rare for a red eye to be late. I didn't know this, but red eyes are usually, they make up for lost time when there were other delays during the day. So it was surprising to them, but that's what they told the family. They're like, it's just delayed. This continued for almost 2 hours of scrambling and, confusing communication between, everyone at the airport, even employees. And they were like, where is this plane? By 8 a.m., the Malaysian government contacted the families and released a statement to the public on the emergent situation that was unfolding, and it hit worldwide news. So once the press statement is made that they've lost contact with the commercial airliner overnight, the race was on. Like, everybody needed to know, like, how are we going to recover everybody? Like, where are they even going? What happened? But specifically, like, at this point, we know the plane has lost communication, so it's down. The plane went down. The only hope now is to look for survivors. This was an immediate search effort that came through, and it was spearheaded by the Malaysian government, but would ultimately involve the help and efforts of 26 different countries looking for this plane, and amassed $150 million worth of search efforts. It is single-handedly the most expensive search effort that has ever, like, worldwide, that has ever been deployed. They relied on satellite imagery, looking for debris and any signs of a crash, because there was roughly 4,000 square miles where the flight might have gone down, possibly even more at this point, because this would also change. They just did not know where it could be. So they followed a couple of false leads and they continued their search. But meanwhile, on land, the investigation is probing into every single person who was on that flight, because they're like, something really bad could have gone down. We have to figure out their backstories and explain what happened here, and if any of the passengers or crew members could have had something to do with this. Like, it could have been an instance of a terrorist attack from a passenger. It could have been anything. Now, the initial investigation found that 2 passengers on that plane, a man from Australia and one from Italy, had actually boarded the plane using fake passports. Both men were from Iran. So this led to a host of theories, assuming that they were the culprits behind an orchestrated attack that eventually took down the plane. But within 24 hours, this was completely ruled out by the government, because it actually found that they were just 2 guys who had falsified passports because they were seeking asylum. They like really dug into their backstories. No history or verifiable records of like violence or any insidious plans or hijacking plans, nothing like that. They were just 2 guys from Iran who were trying to eventually get their way over to Germany. So they were going to go to China first, and Malaysia was the route that they took to get out of their country and seek asylum.
Got it.
So,
I remember that. That just struck a chord. I remember that being kind of like the first thing that people reacted to.
Mm-hmm. Well, because everyone's trying to like force fit the puzzle pieces.
Of course.
Right? Everyone's trying to spell the story out before we know all of the details. But there was really nothing there. They simply like wrong place, wrong time, and just being on a plane that went down. But Malaysia was just the chosen country for their escape. Now, at this point, though, in the investigation, because they had put so much stock into investigating those 2 and it led nowhere, the search has gone by for 48 hours. And all the countries involved are kind of spiraling out because they don't know where to look, and they're really tapping every resource they can. Now, the greatest mishap in this search, this will drive you crazy, is that the Malaysian government was really, really delayed to relay any of their findings on their radar. Specifically, they did not disclose the sharp left. So we know that they were faking right and going towards the China Sea. So everybody was looking at the China Sea. They were following that blip. It was the last thing that we heard about. But the Malaysian government never mentioned that, no, they were faking right and then they turned left. So it's not even clear why they actually sent everybody in the wrong direction if they had the information that, no, they were headed back towards Malaysia. So it was a complete waste of time for the first 48 hours. complete waste of time. And it dismantled all of the efforts. And to this day, it is considered to be one of the greatest mishandlings of the case, that the government was not forthright with this. And at this point, they have to recalibrate the efforts to go west of Malaysia, where they think it most likely went down. But when I read that, I was furious. But the real reasoning behind it was because Malaysia had drastically developed their radar system, their radar tech, and they were afraid that if they explained just how advanced and far their radar could reach out and disclose that to the world publicly, it would threaten neighboring countries.
Okay.
So it was more of like I don't even know if that's considered like diplomatic affairs, like a foreign affairs decision where they're like, this could jeopardize an entire country if we compromise like the secrecy of how advanced our radar is. But so they were just deliberating. They're like, I mean, like, we're not going to send people in the right location, but we also can't jeopardize the entire country if we tell them, like, no, we have radar that goes all the way out towards, like, these sections of the world.
Sure.
I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you kind of understand the decision making?
I understand.
It's very cutthroat.
Yeah. I mean, I understand it. I mean, that's exactly the word I was thinking. I was like, this was such a difficult call, I'm sure, for them to, you're either putting the 239 people at risk, or you're putting countries at risk with more people. I'm sure it's just they're trying to weigh that decision. But I think ultimately, as we know, the more time that goes by, I mean, the less likely you are to probably figure out what is going on. So, but I guess in this case, it probably was the right call, since I don't know. I don't know what they could have uncovered in those 48 hours, but
I don't know that there could have been any survivors. For a plane of that size to hit water, when a plane that heavy and is one that's going that fast hits water, from everything I read in my research, it's like a plane hitting concrete.
Yeah.
Like the impact is that severe. So I think that the decision was mostly made out of safety, but I think it was also made knowing that the only thing that would be discovered in this case ever would probably be remains, if that.
Got it.
Like debris. So they actually do this twice, which is really frustrating. But you can imagine like how this went over with families eventually, because what they had said, like once they disclosed that we had the public information that we saw them fake right and then go left, they actually said they had eyes on the plane until 1:30 a.m. This was false. They actually had it on their radar all the way until 3 a.m. and they saw it pivot direction once it was going like west to Malaysia. It did another pivot. It actually turned again and went up towards the Indian Ocean. So they also were delayed in disclosing that. So this was like spelling out a huge like blanket of mistrust and confusion for the public, and really like the international military efforts on this, because they're tapping their resources to help in this endeavor. And they're kind of feeling bewildered that an entire government is just sending people on a wild goose chase when they know that you're never going to find anything over there. Like, why were they wasting everyone's time with the misinformation was the big question everyone was asking. So then there's secrecy and there's delays, and they have now pushed the search all the way to day 4, and the families were just in agony and disbelief as to how this was handled and what had really happened, and they felt the whole thing was being treated like it was a big secret. Now, eventually, the government releases a statement on this, and they explain their reasoning. They talk about how they had internal concerns about disclosing how advanced the radar tech had become, but we've already kind of talked about that. So once this information is out, the Malaysian government had the Indian Ocean on their search territory, and they said, okay, this is the last place that we actually know they were going. They end up begging the Australian government to help, which the Australian government agrees to, and they searched the most hostile waters of any ocean for that plane, for missing Flight 370. And Australian officials made public their challenges of this search and said that it was truly testing, this is a quote, but I'm paraphrasing it, testing the human capacity of engineering excellence, as those waters were impossible to look through. They were volatile, they were deep, they were filled with underwater trenches, and it was just an extreme hunt, at this point not even to find survivors because it was unlikely. They were just trying to get through the waters to actually find the debris. As if whoever brought the plane down, is what they were thinking, probably knew that if this was the location they were going to crash the plane, these would be the most impossible waters to find them. It almost felt deliberate. Does that resonate at all, or does that feel like a stretch?
No, I mean, it definitely resonates. If we're still going with the idea that this was, a deliberate thing, I didn't know that, and so it's just, yeah. I mean, that is just really, really dark, because then you're, also making sure that the loved ones don't ever really get closure, and that's just disgusting.
Yeah, never. Yeah, I think that's the thought. That's what they were thinking. They're like, if the pilot was the one who crashed this plane, he knew that this was going to be impossible to retrieve. But it's actually around this time they conclude the above water search. This gets really interesting because they decide to send out a submersible as part of a search project and a search mission for this plane that's going to go underwater. And I believe I don't think it was controlled by someone inside of it. I think it was robotic, and it was basically set to cover 3 million square miles of search territory underwater, looking for plane or debris. And 3 million square miles, just for like reference for anybody who has a hard time visualizing that is roughly the size of the US. That's the size of the country. It continued this for months and months and months, until actually over a year would pass of this thing underwater in this area looking for the plane. And the government could no longer afford the cost of it because it was tens of millions of dollars for this project. It produced thousands and thousands, tens of thousands actually, of images underwater. Never once was Flight 370 or any piece of it found in that water. So in a quote from officials, and this one really freaked me out, and kind of what you were saying before about like how open space terrifies you, he was like trying to give an answer. The public was upset, like, how come you haven't found anything? And he said, you have to understand that the ocean is as close to nothing as any of us can get.
Mm-hmm.
It's so sinister. That's sinister as hell, no?
Oh, definitely sinister. I mean, it just reminds you of how small and like helpless, in situations like this, I'm sure those loved ones felt. And that's just so upsetting. And, but what I will say is that you explaining that, I am so amazed and like baffled by technology. Like the fact that we have something that can cover that much ground within a year and be able to tap for things is pretty amazing.
Not to take us to a point of like a joke, but I was just thinking about Tor. And I was like, I mean, we covered the span of the US in less than a year. I had to break a little bit of tension. I'm sorry.
But that technology in our truck was nothing near. Oh my Lord.
No. We might as well we were traveling by bobsled. I don't know what we were doing.
100%.
Now, I wanted to say, like, at this point in the research, it sounds like all hope of finding the flight was lost for over a year because the Malaysian government's like, we cannot afford the effort until a discovery was made. And this is where we're going to get into some real conspiracy around this. So on the French commune of Saint Andre Reunion, there was debris that was discovered by a group of beach cleaners. There was a large particle of plane debris, metal that contained a serial number. So fearful of what they found, police were contacted and investigators flew to the site where that serial number was connected back to Flight 370. This was a piece of the plane. So an immediate search of the area followed, which would eventually turn up close to, I think, 20 separate pieces of debris, both from the plane as well as personal belongings from passengers, such as suitcases, allegedly water bottles, etc. But outside of these items, and not all of them have been confirmed of this plane. I think officially there have only been like 3 pieces that they said are absolutely from this plane. But outside of all of these, the plane itself was not located. But this gave us the closest zone of where we think the plane might have went down, and it uncovered some very disturbing witness statements from people who were sailing near these waters on the morning the plane went down, apparently. So I found 2 separate witness accounts in my reporting, and I believe they're both considered very credible. They were separate of each other, and they were in the Indian Ocean on this morning. One was from a woman, and she was sailing, and the other was from a fisherman who was also out there sailing, and both claimed to see an aircraft soaring through the sky early that morning that looked like it was on fire. So we're unsure what story that tells us, but it sounds like an extreme mechanical failure or possibly a deliberate scorching of the aircraft from inside the plane. These sightings would have been very close to the suspected timing of when we believe the plane went down. Any thoughts on that before I jump into some additional details? I see wheel spinning.
It's as we're talking through all this, I keep coming back to if we're going, if I'm thinking about the pilot, and I'm still kind of in that zone right now, thinking about like where he was mentally when all this was going down. The thought, it just keeps coming back to me though, that he's a father and a family man, and
husband.
Yeah. And I'm just kind of like, it is in moments like this where we're talking about them looking up and seeing a plane that looks like it's on fire, that I have a little bit of like hope in my stomach that it wasn't that, because I just, it's hard for me to believe that somebody that's, carried a family through the world would go to the lengths of doing something awful and then like blowing up a plane.
Like like a true suicide mission.
Yeah. That just sounds so unbelievable. I mean, it could have been a thing, but, and also we don't know if this was actually the plane, but if we're going with that.
We don't. It's just a compelling couple of witness statements. It's interesting. I mean, how many planes could have been flying over this? And for two separate people to see a plane in the sky on fire seems very compelling to me, because it's like, how many other things could that have been? But I agree with you. I don't know. Do you think it's possible that it was like a really serious mechanical issue? All of the, transmissions and like communication devices went out, and he just kept the plane up in the air for like 7 hours straight, just trying to like figure out a plan. Like, we've got no way to contact any Air Force to like land the plane, and then maybe try to do a water landing eventually.
Maybe, or if it was, the craziest thing is if it was dark, like, and let's say that everything went out and he was trying to just find a way to get back to something, that would kind of explain why you would fly the additional 7 hours to wait until the sun came up and you're trying to find, and you're flying towards, I guess I'm trying to think about this. If you're flying back towards France, it's like, when is the sun gonna rise? Like, would it be?
You think I know? You think I have the information for you?
Listen, last time you asked me to tell you what DB Cooper's entire plan was.
Listening back to that, when you said something, you were like, well, I don't know. You're asking me. I was just asking you to step in for the FBI. Why is that such an ass?
Well, I don't know what I'm asking you to step in for. I don't know what I'm asking you.
No, I like where you're going with that.
Get your
that makes sense
sundial
to
out
me.
and tell me when the sun is supposed to rise.
Well, how many? Okay, so if it was a mechanical failure, maybe it's possible to even think that the entire, like, maybe the electricity was out on the plane. Like, he has nothing in the cockpit that's giving him any sense of direction. Oh my God, that's so scary. Because then not only is the sky pitch black, the entire oh my God, that's so scary. The entire inside of a plane is pitch black, including the cockpit. You're flying in a dark room.
But it would kind of explain why he would keep it up in the air so long, because he's hoping that if it's 1 a.m. when all that goes down, and he keeps that thing going, and he's just praying that he's got enough gas to keep it and try to.
I'll find sunlight somewhere.
Like with his experience, maybe he had a sense of direction that was just like out of this world, knew it pretty well to which direction to go to get back towards land of some sort. I don't know.
I can see a scenario like that. The only thing that disrupts it is that the likelihood again of the mechanical failure across the entirety of the plane is virtually impossible.
Yeah.
So it could have been a scenario where maybe it wasn't even him who was doing it, but it was a hijacking situation, and then suddenly, like, the hijacker was subdued on the plane, but they're, out of luck because they have no communication and no power. So now they're stuck in a situation of like, okay, mission is to keep the plane up in the air and stable for as long as possible. I just don't know how, because then in that scenario, we're assuming like, okay, all of the mechanical issues were actually deliberate from a hijacker. So it's not that the plane was malfunctioning. So how do we explain people seeing the plane on fire in the sky? You know?
Well, I wonder if it just like, could it have been a gas thing? Like the fuel thing? It just exploded? Like at a certain point, I mean, that could be something.
I mean, any number of things could have really happened, but it's just, that was a strange detail. But I actually think there's a theory here that you're going to find very, very interesting about cyber hijacking, which is such a scary concept. And apparently it's very possible. So let's just discuss, some of the eerie things that we learn after the fact during the investigation that involved the captain and any communication attempts from passengers and whatnot. Like I said, anything that went down in Flight 370. So I'm going to first discuss some of the debris that was found and the conspiracy around that. So there is a lot of public mistrust, let's say, in the debris that was located, of which there were 20 pieces, only 3 have been officially confirmed. There was a collection of what is believed to have been verified debris of this flight located in the Indian Ocean, but some believe that given the pressure on the Malaysian government to find something after a year of searching and the end of the ongoing, or to try to end the ongoing costs of this search, which amassed more than 155 million at this point, they planted several fabricated pieces of plane debris and onboard evidence to appease the public and those who were searching and try to give closure to the case. Now, this was just a claim. There was no reason for anyone to believe this theory until there were a few third-party people who chimed in that could kind of back this up. So back in 2012, this airplane, the specific aircraft, actually had an accident at an airport that was very benign, but it was like an on-the-runway collision with another plane. This affected the right wing of this plane and caused a substantial amount of damage. Now, that damage was eventually repaired with completely new parts and replacements provided by Boeing, and ultimately the entire right wing was replaced. But coincidentally, the debris that was found during the search, what they found in near like that French island, was just from the right wing of the plane. The right wing, which was completely replaced by Boeing just years prior, and those broken parts had been archived somewhere else in locations known as plane boneyards. So it's believed that the debris, which they think was planted in the Indian Ocean, were the archived broken parts from the right wing in 2012, that somehow the Malaysian government created an orchestrated event where they were able to search where it was, get those parts, and then they were able to fabricate them to put them in the ocean, right? Now, it seems very far-fetched, but what really drove this theory of the planted debris were that these pieces of the plane seemed to have barnacles on them on every side. Barnacles can only develop on surfaces that are completely submerged in water all of the time, or at least 90% of the time. However, these pieces were tested in water flotation tanks by the party that found them, like the body that found them. They all float, making it almost entirely impossible that barnacles could have formed on every side of this debris, unless it was a deliberate effort that took a year of the Malaysian government retrieving those like boneyard pieces, submerging them to make it look like they'd suffered the weathering of a year lost at sea, and then planting them. But it actually gets even stranger. Tests on the barnacles could actually determine the temperature of the waters that they grew in, and those waters seemed to be colder than the waters that were surrounding this part of the Indian Ocean where the debris was found, which would suggest that the barnacles were developed in different waters. How does that make sense?
It also would take a pretty evil, like, government, whoever came up with this thing to start doing that a year ago, essentially. To have started the fabrication process of shrapnel.
The parts.
Yeah, a year ago. Like, that would be so sinister. I want to believe that that's not true, but I know that governments, I actually don't know much about the Malaysian government and like kind of if it's how its people feel about it. But listen, we know that governments all around the world do things that they're not supposed to do to protect themselves. So I sound like a real Facebook conspiracy theorist.
No, you sound very rational. I sound like a Facebook nut. We could talk about some of the potential motives of why the Malaysian government would fabricate this. Obviously, one of the easiest tells was their response to the discovery. So since multiple pieces were collected at different points and by different governments, because they were not found near Malaysia, search parties that were there, of course, were like, well, we need to, collect these and test them in different ways. The Malaysian government was abnormally quick to rule that beyond a shadow of a doubt, this debris was 100% connected to Flight 370. Whereas the debris that the French government collected, they were the ones who deployed those tests that I mentioned earlier, and they noted all the discrepancies, and they're like, well, this does not really make sense that this is connected back to Flight 370, but the serial number does match, which we can only connect back to the accident a year prior, where the right wing was removed and replaced. It just sat in direct contrast. I mean, this led to a wider conversation about mistrust and growing suspicion that the Malaysian government was just becoming very, very desperate, because I know it's been like years, but to look back, the international pressure they had on them to figure out what happened to this plane and like all the money they had invested, for them to come back with nothing, I think would have been extreme and would have been met with a lot of resistance. So it didn't seem off the table to think they had been involved in some kind of a shady scheme to basically plant evidence that they had fabricated with weathering and these barnacles in a part of the ocean that was kind of roughly where they think the plane went down. I can see a motive there for sure.
Yeah, well, I think, I'm purely going off of my memory, which I hope this is correct, but I think the other thing that they were kind of messing up is that you have to be transparent. Like, if you're not finding stuff and you're doing everything possible, say that. Like tell the families that. Like, be transparent. I think if I remember correctly, the Malaysian government was they kept their cards really close to their chest, which is just
from the get-go, they were like concealing information about what they knew just from radar. So they had already planted the seed of mistrust.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this led to all these conversations where, once this hit the news, this did hit international news, it became a scandal and actually evoked protests. So the exact opposite happened from what they were anticipating, and particularly protests from the families and loved ones of the victims of this flight. And one of the mothers of the victims actually spoke out against the government. And just to paraphrase a quote from what she said to reporters, with questions asking about, why are they trying to do this? She said, they're trying to fool us. And is it because they don't want us to take the compensation money? Do they think that this is, just going to make us go away, kind of thing? So at this point, the Malaysian government clearly already had intent by offering compensation money to kind of stop all efforts, get people to quiet down, and try to push this behind them, forget about the disaster of flight, 370. It felt compelling to me. I felt like I could see a motive there.
Yeah.
But I do have something else here that, if this couldn't get any stranger, there were apparently 6 additional pieces of debris from the plane that were also located on the beaches of Madagascar, and the Malaysian government had orchestrated one of their officials to come and personally transport this debris. This was a process that this person was very well versed in, and it was a person who had done something similar to this with retrieving debris for official government purposes many times. Now, for an unknown reason, while en route to obtain this debris from the Madagascar government, this official vehicle was hit with heavy artillery, and this person was assassinated and never picked up those remaining pieces. And the reason behind that is not clear. No one really knows why. Like, for what motive? A government official picking up those additional pieces, why they would be taken out. But as far as we know, the Malaysian government has still never retrieved those additional 6 pieces of the plane. They are still in the possession of the Madagascar government. How does that feel?
It's all hitting me now like a wave. Why this case is so heavy for me, because I think they had an opportunity after such a big tragedy to have like a redemption hour and really show people like how much they were going to step up to the plate and do everything they can, and be transparent about it. Like, I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse, but like that sounds
makes sense.
so just off.
I mean, the coincidence of it is compelling to me.
Yeah.
It's starting to tell a story, but I wanted to dip into this other thing that I touched on earlier, the idea of cyber hijacking, because when I went through this theory, I think this is the one that's going to sink for you. Because when we talk about cyber hijacking, how that's even possible, what would be the motive for that, this actually ties the cyber hijacking plot back to the United States, which is really interesting. So I had a tough time trying to understand the theory initially because it's a commercial aircraft. So why would there be any other government that would want to take down a plane like this? And how could they even do it? So let's first talk about the why. The easiest tell in this theory is that the plane was being used to transport something which we're not fully clear of. There was unspecified cargo that was to go from Malaysia to China, and it was being transported what would seem to be like a pretty inconspicuous aircraft, right? A commercial airliner, but one that's large enough to carry something like this. So people who were reviewing this case, there were odd details in the cargo manifest that was released by the airline, which detailed this bizarre and heavy weighted cargo of lithium batteries. It was weighing more than 2 cars. Now, the Malaysian government, once this was pointed out, they came out against the airline because the airline was the one who released the cargo manifest. And the airline was like, no, that's not true and that's not correct. The airline is lying. There were only about 200 pounds of lithium batteries, and the remaining weight was all radio accessories and chargers. But then when the government was probed on like, well, what does that mean? What are radio accessories and chargers? They had no official response. So it was just odd that they seemed to go out of their way to discredit the airline and what they were reporting the cargo was, and nobody's really entirely sure about what was being transported from Malaysia to China. Now, this bleeds into the theory of cyber hijacking, and I'll explain why I think this is terrifying. So let's first go back in time. Years and years prior, Boeing had actually patented a state-of-the-art tech following 9/11 where a plane could have an internal system built into like the actual infrastructure of the plane, which could prevent onboard terrorist hijackings. In the event that a plane was overtaken by a terrorist, the system could be deployed to remove full control from the flight crew, and the plane could be remotely flown, rerouted, and landed on an autopilot feature without anyone on board having any control in that process. Now, this was never officially deployed in commercial aircrafts as far as anyone knows. It is not built into commercial planes, but the suspicion is that that's not entirely true, and there are many aircrafts with Boeing, specifically their larger planes, which have this capability. And it's only known to officials. This is not public information. So the theory is that whatever secret cargo was being stowed on Flight 370, the US government sought to intercept the trip and remotely hijack the flight using the Boeing system, which could explain some of the strange patterns of like veering to the right and then the extreme sharp left, all of the systems going off radar, communication failing. The pilots didn't see it coming. They didn't see any like mechanical error that would happen. Now, the last place that we know the plane was headed was towards the Indian Ocean, where the U.S. conveniently does have a base with a landing strip on the island of Diego Garcia. How is this conspiracy hitting so far? How you feeling?
I feel like I'm taking a 180. I'm taking a sharp left.
You're taking your sharp left.
I know. It is very compelling. I'm like on the edge of my seat. I mean, that is the only thing for me is I'm thinking like, I find it a little hard to believe that they would just kind of, they had never done this on a commercial flight before, that they were like, yeah, let's do it on this one with 239 people on board. But I guess if the cargo that they were transporting was serious enough that they would maybe try it. I don't know.
Well, the theory is that they didn't actually crash the plane, is what some people think. So what they're saying is following the plane being autopilot landed on this airstrip on the island of Diego Garcia, which is a protected military base for the U.S. Nobody can travel there unless you have clearance. The secret cargo of the plane itself was confiscated, as was the plane. which was then dismantled and hidden on the island, and the passengers were either imprisoned or killed by the U.S. government. And this is all alleged. I'm not pushing any theory. I'm just saying. But it was a part of a mission that involved the public as collateral to eventually just basically hide what they did. And then they were the ones who orchestrated the planting of the debris on that French island. And it told the story of a tragic plane crash. Now, some of this is supported, I will say, by alleged eyewitness testimony from two journalists. There is Farah Ahmed and Amend. I definitely did a typo on this name, so I'll just say Amend, and there is another last name to this person, but I don't want to mispronounce their last name. They spoke with witnesses on a neighboring island near the island of Diego Garcia, and they learned of some pretty damning stories here. According to witnesses on this neighboring island, which is just about 700 miles south of the island of Diego Garcia, they claimed that they saw a white large aircraft with red stripes, just like this plane, fly past the island on the morning of March 8th. The plane was extremely low, which could indicate it was lowering to land either by its own plan or it was experiencing a mechanical failure, and knew that the island of Diego Garcia was the nearest location with an airstrip. But the plane, or a plane with communication failures headed towards a U.S. military base, which the base cannot identify, would be shot down. So that kind of spells two different conspiracies here. There's one where the U.S. cyber hijacks the plane to land it and retrieve the cargo. There's another one where it's a mechanical failure and the plane is panicking because it doesn't know where it's going, but eventually knows it's going to be headed in the direction of this airstrip, even though it's at a military base. But because the U.S. military can't communicate with the plane and say, state your intentions, who are you? It just shoots down the plane. So if the military did that, that would be a story they'd probably want to cover up. The U.S. does not want to be responsible for accidentally shooting down a plane with 239 people on board.
Exactly. That was going to be my one question. Is like, so if they had saved the day and gotten all these people off safely, why wouldn't we know about that? So the second version, like you're saying, where they kind of accidentally shot it down because they figured, is that what you're saying? They like accidentally shot it down because they figured it was wasn't a
it could go
flight.
either way. We're like, the U.S. was cyber hijacking and they're like, we have to land it to get the cargo, or the cargo thing is not significant at all. And the plane was just having a malfunction and was trying to land. And the U.S. was like, this is a threat, shoot it down. And then realized that they had taken innocent people's lives. Both seem plausible. I can definitely see a scenario. The cyber hijacking is possibly a bit far-fetched, but it also would really explain how all of those communication systems went out.
And you're doing this to me right
so
after
scary.
July 4th.
I know.
I'm like,
you trying to feel patriotic?
I'm like, I'm patriotic, and then I'm hearing this.
Do you know a year ago when we did, I think our second episode, it was on the 4th of July, and we started the episode and we said, Happy 4th of July, and you said, well, Happy 4th, baby. Happy 4th.
Happy 4th.
I listened to it the other day.
That's amazing. Oh my God. I feel like I remember having like, wait, this is so weird. So you're going to have to tell me if my memory serves me correct. How did you listen recently?
They're all fresh in my memory.
Okay. Because I swear to God, if I'm thinking of that episode and where I was, I had a big gulp.
I think you did. Is a big gulp from Wawa?
Oh, damn it. You're right. It was a Wawa. I was going to say, I literally just ran out and got a big gulp before we started this.
No, you had a Wawa. I remember you said, I've got my Wawa.
Damn it. Okay.
It was Wawa, baby.
Well, same energy.
Close enough.
Same energy.
I mean, maybe on the 4th, you did have your
no,
your
it was a Wawa.
Wawa.
You're right.
Well, there is another angle here that I have to tell you about because this might throw a huge wrench in everything for you. There is an additional detail that was overlooked and then came to light for everybody. I mentioned earlier, or maybe I didn't mention this earlier, there's a mystery passenger who was on the plane. So only 227 passenger tickets were sold, but there was a 228th ticket that was scanned, and we have no record of who this was and why they were on this flight. So could it have been that they were there to accompany the cargo if this was the cyber hijacking scenario. And then the US mission unfolded to intercept the plane via cyber hijacking, and the US was able to do whatever they were going to do. Or the US had intentions to reroute the plane and land it and then confiscate the cargo and arrest everybody. But the person who was on board made it a suicide mission because they could not allow the cargo to get into the possession of the US. And they were the ones who were internally tampering with all of the communication devices so that the plane could not be tracked, or maybe they could try to dismantle how the US was flying this plane. That's possible.
How the heck does somebody board a plane without ID?
Unless, well, officially, I think what the government eventually says, they're like, no, this was a misprint. Like, that's not true, which could very well be true. But according to the system, it shows a 228th ticket was scanned to get onto the plane. The only scenario where I can think that would be someone who would stay anonymous would be somebody who was a government official and their sole job was to accompany the cargo from Malaysia to China. In this theory, it's believed that the 228th passenger unbuckled themselves at 39 minutes into the flight and made their way to the cockpit and either forced the captain to remove the circuit breaker above him, or he did it himself, and it would have wiped out all communication with any control center. And then it would help to basically tamper with any radar detection. So it could have been, there's this scenario where they were there to accompany the cargo, or this was a military mission from the US, so that it was a US official who had boarded the plane somehow, if they were able to secure documentation or a ticket to do so. And it was a suicide mission to make sure the cargo was going to get into the ocean, that the plane was going to go down. It would never reach China. I don't know. I mean, like I said, this is just a theory because they've tried to dispel the 228th passenger, but the thought of a mystery passenger really freaked me out when looking at this case, I'll be honest.
Yeah. I mean, I was really hoping you were going to say, well, it's just a theory, like there's no proof. But I mean, if the ticket was scanned, that's so weird. When do you ever hear of that happening on commercial flights, that somebody can just walk on?
I mean, I was thinking, I'm like, if it was an air marshal, maybe. I really don't know how that works, to be honest. We should have invited somebody on who's like an airport official.
It's just weird to me because it's like, wouldn't you want, even if it's a government official, like wouldn't, or maybe not, wouldn't they want their ID to be known to at least the government? And I guess the government could be protecting that ID.
It's possible.
Just so that their families like know that they're on that plane or something?
No idea. I mean, that's a very risky like territory to be working in. So I'm sure that's somebody who's willing to cut their losses if needed for the sake of the mission. I don't know. The last thing that I would talk about in terms of like theories and strange, thoughts about this is whether you think it was a hijacking or a mechanical issue. This still does not completely dispel the theory that this could have been an orchestrated and deliberate suicide from the pilot himself. And although, we have those reports of the odd and withdrawn behavior prior to the flight, and we have that really eerie deleted metadata from the previous flights on his at-home simulator, it is not suspected, actually, by those who've investigated the case that he did this intentionally. They do not believe that the deleted logs of the flights show anything damning, but we have no way to know for sure. If he did take the plane and he did plan to crash it, it was probably an ordeal that involved him cutting communication intentionally after he signed off from Malaysia. And he did so he could ensure almost zero signals or systems could manually find their way to where this plane was and track it down. And it's possible he was either holding the co-captain hostage or he had incapacitated him. The question is, what happened in the following 7 hours where he was just flying in the sky, possibly contemplating, am I going to do this? Is there still a way out? Am I going to do this? All while we've got passengers in the cabin who just know something impending is coming. Sorry.
No, my gosh. No,
I was going to go through my conclusion.
Go.
Well, I was just going to say there are just so many conflicting points of evidence and motive and witness statements, because I've gone through like 4 or 5 different witness statements, 2 of which on each side spell completely different theories from each other, but both are considered credible on each side. So in large part, I think that's just what makes the case so fascinating to talk through, is that there are so many strange and very possible scenarios of what could have happened here. But I just want to ask you, is there anything you personally feel that feels the most logical based on everything I've gone through in this case?
I really don't want to believe that it would have been a mental health crisis for a pilot. I really don't want to believe, but it still feels like the most likely thing in my mind. And it's weird because as what I was just going to say is that I know sometimes when people, are going to go through with like a suicide, they sometimes have the second thought where they don't want to follow through with it anymore. And I wondered as we were talking about it, like, did he shut everything off and then all of a sudden was like, what the heck am I doing? And like came out of an episode and tried to get it back. Like that also was running through my mind. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I'm as you're describing it, I'm like going through the scenario in my mind of like, because it's the equivalent of like standing on the ledge, you know, because people rarely just decide they want to commit suicide and then just jump. It's a waiting game.
Yeah.
And a wrestling in their mind. I actually just read something very interesting recently about suicide. This is not necessarily related, but it has always been viewed as solely like a psychological issue. There was a teenager who actually just won the first position prize for this discovery. She did like an evaluation of subjects looking at brain matter of a collection of people who had committed suicide and found there's actually like a physiological protein, or there's something in their body that actually changed their brain chemistry. So it was never just a psychological thing. It was quite literally a difference, like a chemical protein.
That's
so
fascinating.
Interesting. So, yeah. But to get back to your point of what you were saying, I can definitely see a scenario like that where the second you turn off, you cut all communication like that, there's really a weird impasse that you're at where there's no going back, because you're going to lose your pilot's license. You're going to go to jail for endangerment. Like your whole life is going to be completely and utterly ruined for what you just did. But on the other end of things, the only escape now is to follow through with what you imagined, which is to plunge the plane into the water, knowing that you have an entire cabin of people on board. And I mean, some of the stories I was reading about the people on board, there were like honeymoon couples. There was an entire group of calligraphy artists. They had like gone to like an exhibition or something. It's very strange.
Wow.
Yeah, just like it was just a random collection of very innocent people who just boarded that plane that night and never once even thought that that would be their last time touching ground, you know?
Yeah.
I don't want to believe it either, but there is something that feels very deliberate. I don't think I can believe that this was solely a mechanical issue that was out of everyone's control, and then it was just a tragic end.
Yes, and I'll tell you why I also have that sinking feeling is that he had so much experience. He was so, like, he was practicing all the time. He was 56 or 57 years old, had a full career. And I find it like it's a little hard for me to walk through a scenario where the first thing didn't go off and he wasn't immediately like, boom, 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 knowing how to try to get something under control.
Yeah.
You know, or, I mean, it's not entirely implausible to me that it was, the cyber hijacking is super interesting. Like, I think that could
terrifying.
I mean, that is really, God. So that is totally a theory. Like, we don't know if this technology exists with Boeing, or we do know it exists.
No, that tech really exists. Boeing patented this. This is all the way back in 2001 after 9/11. They developed this. But the problem was, for scenarios like this, they were like, we need to know that if something like this is in place, that there's no possibility that a foreign country could actually interfere and cyber hijack a plane without even having a terrorist on board. Because if the US theoretically could like jump in and hijack a plane like that, so could any country. If it had the right tech and it had the right way to infiltrate. So as far as we know, this has never been placed on any commercial aircraft, but it's very possible that's not the truth. And there's good reason that everyone is kept in the dark about that.
Right. Oh my God. I feel like
So
such
scary.
a small person listening to this case.
I know. Sometimes I go through the government things and
Yeah,
I'm like, I don't know anything. I'm a common person.
I know, baby. I'm living in DC and I'm like constantly reminded. Oh man. I mean, what do you think?
Like my biggest contemplation is like getting to Trader Joe's at the end of the week. Like I can't even fathom the idea of cyber hijacking.
I know. Or like cyber warfare for that matter. Like if two countries can do it at the same time.
I'll tell you what would really like dismantle an entire country, the internet getting cut out.
Oh my
That
gosh.
would be crazy. People would go crazy. Oh my God. Like it would shut down everything. Everything would be shut down. No money. Like everything would just be so crazy.
While we're like being Facebook conspiracy theorists.
I know. This is like the furthest we're going down the rabbit hole, guys.
But while we're there, it's like, I mean, it's insane to me to remember that we've had hacking happen, very recently. And that is all happening all the time. Like there's so much about that you and I don't know. And it's just, I think that feeling is why this case is so intense for people, is because it is a reminder that like at the end of the day, you want to trust your government and you want to trust that the people that work for it are out there to protect you, and that the common man is the one that's like really why all these things are in place. All these policies are in place. And it's just, it's like a very daunting feeling when you remember that there's a lot that's happening behind the scenes that we all don't know about.
So much that we don't know about. The thought of the idea of like a secret mission of like secret cargo that couldn't go to China and the US intercepts, like it's things like that where it's so far away and over our heads. It's terrifying. I really don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. I'm very sure in my conviction that I do not believe, like I said, that this was just a cut and dry mechanical issue and everyone in this case is innocent. And it's odd to me that to this day, the body of that plane has never been found, ever. I really don't know how I feel about that, but that is why this is the mystery of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. Any final thoughts, Miss Stu?
I just got to say, you nailed the research on that one. That was really, wow.
Oh, please stop. That was
I'm just
lot
saying,
of research.
I'm not trying to
my
like,
Lord.
I'm not sugarcoating. I mean, like that's going to sit with me. I mean, they always sit with me, but that was like, I felt like I really had way more context about it than I had before. And like, feel like I could actually speak about it. I
feel like I learned something while researching this, to be honest. I feel so much more educated about just all of the different ways that planes can be tracked and like all of the safety measures and protocols about like, okay, if this system goes down, we've got system 2 and system 3 and system 4. Like that's wild that there are so many things that can protect people.
Mm-hmm. Well, now you know not to pick me as a co-pilot though, because I'm gonna out
I can't believe you said that. I was like, Stu, you could literally jeopardize someone's
Is that really license. A thing? This person is not a commercial pilot.
I would assume.
This is just like a for funsies thing.
Let's look it up in real time so I can just know. Oh my God. Is it illegal to let a non-pilot?
Papers, if any of you all are pilots, let us know in the comments so I can cover my ass accordingly.
With my mouth open. Unlike driving cars, the PIC, I don't know what that is, may allow anyone, including a non-pilot. Oh, okay. A pilot who may not legally act as a pilot in command or any other fully qualified pilot, fly the airplane, or be the sole manipulator. This was such a confusing sentence. So it says may allow. Yes, they can do that. I don't know why that is a circumstance where they can do that. You can fly certain planes without a pilot's license. Okay, so it seems like it's low stakes. It's the air. What could happen up there?
I mean, with me as a co-pilot, a hell of a lot, because as we were doing it, now that I know I'm in the clear, as he said to me, go ahead and, he kind of like didn't even tell me I was flying it at first. And after he told me he was helping me.
Also dangerous.
Also dangerous, but he was in full control, but kind of like, it's almost like when you're driving one of those, like driver's ed cars and the teacher has the
That's kind of
wheel.
what I was imagining. Yeah.
Pretty much like, I mean, not like that, but like way more sophisticated. But as I started to like learn how to do it more, I mean, I was like basically about to nosedive us. Like, I was like, please don't let me do this.
It's crazy that it was like that sensitive that the second you felt like you were in control, suddenly it was going out of control.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like those little tiny planes. I mean, this is like a little propeller plane. Like this, they're so sensitive to, the slightest little bit of
I imagine they're probably
change.
Even harder actually to fly a commercial aircraft or like a large aircraft, one that has autopilot, obviously. But it's fun. I don't know if you saw this on Reels or not, but there was a trend on TikTok of girls asking their straight boyfriends, because there's a theory going around that all straight men believe, no matter their level of knowledge, that if they were put in the position, they could land a plane. And like these girls ask their boyfriends, they're like, do you think you could land an airplane, like a commercial airplane? And they're like, I mean, am I the last resort? And she's like, yeah, like both pilots are out and like air traffic control has said you have to land the plane. He's like, and they're always like, yeah, I'm like 75% sure I could do it. like not even a second of doubt.
And that
confidence.
And that, my friends, is straight male confidence at its finest.
Oh, I wouldn't trust him. But anywho, thank you guys so much for sitting through this heap of research. This was a very, very lengthy case. I'm amazed that I got through as much as I did, because I was like, I'm going to tap out at a certain point. But that is it. That is the missing Flight 370 of Malaysian Airlines, one of the greatest mysteries since 2014.
And now you got to go solve the other greatest mystery, which is, where did the cargo that was delivered to your address? Where the hell is that thing?
Oh my God. I was just wondering, I was like, was that even included in the episode? It was.
It was.
My missing package. I'm going to go find that. I'm going to have to knock on some doors and shake some people down.
I'm so sorry. The last thing I wanted you to have to do.
I think it'll be fine. If anything, it'll be a story I can tell next week. And Creepers, we will catch you on next week's episode on Friday. For now, Stu and I will say goodbye.
Bye, Creepers.
Fare thee well.